welcome to yet another episode of the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. This is a show where I, Elly, MD of Transition Partners, and the CEO, Sandra, talk to some of the world's highest achieving business and tech leaders.
In each episode, we will be sharing tales, tips, techniques, and war stories in the hope that you will learn from some of these amazing leaders to help you develop and progress your career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. So today we have a wonderful guest on the show. So Caitlin Gough is a director at Bluefruit Software, who are based in Cornwall, which is actually where I grew up. And me and Caitlin started talking on Twitter a few weeks ago now, so I'm really pleased to have her on the show. Bluefruit Software delivers embedded software and AI using lean agile practices and test-driven development. They work with an innovative organization in industries such as medical devices, biopharmaceutical equipment, aerospace, and manufacturing. Caitlin is the chair of board for Cornwall and Silly Digital Skills Partnership. She sits on the board for the Employment Skills Board in Cornwall and co-founder of TECgirls, who are a non-profit organisation run completely by volunteers with the aim of inspiring young girls aged between 6 and 12 to consider a career in the technology, engineering and creative sectors. So many lovely things to say there about you, Caitlin. And it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Fantastic. What an impressive background. Yeah, I think you were saying earlier that you keep getting asked to do things and you don't know how to say no. I don't know how you find time to do anything else. Amazing. So it's great to have you on the show. I usually kickstart the discussion and the chat. So I think initially it would be really good to, I guess, set a little bit of context for the viewers and the listeners for you to tell me a little bit more about you, what you do, and a little bit more about Bluefruit Software, please.
Yeah, great. So, as I said, my name's Caitlin. That was it's always nice to hear your background told at you. Sometimes you kind of forget all of it. So yeah, I'm one of the directors at Bluefruit Software. I've been in the role now for just about 4 years. That's been really exciting. And at Bluefruit, I look after the business development team, as well as and marketing, account management, and really bring the kind of understanding of business, financials, marketing, and all of that to the rest of the team. Makes everyone else is an engineer. Yeah, that's kind of my slice of the pie, if you like, with business. So yeah.
And how many is there within the business? What size business is it? And
yeah, so Bluefruit's actually been on a pretty fun journey for the last few years. So when I started at the company, there was, I think, about 24 of us, and we were on a rapid path to growth already at the time. The company's actually been going for 20 years, and it's kind of gone through the ups and downs and flows as the embedded sector has. So we saw an increased boost about 5-6 years ago, when everyone suddenly decided the Internet of Things is incredibly important, and suddenly they cared about embedded software again. For a long time, they've kind of been ignoring it as I think it's one of the most unpopular sectors in tech. C languages are the least popular language. But when everyone wanted to make everything smart, suddenly embedded was the answer. And we were in a really nice position where we had a lot of embedded engineers at a time where it hadn't been a popular thing to do for the last 20 years. So suddenly everyone needed embedded engineers and couldn't find them. And that's where Bluefruit was able to step in and pick up projects. We've always had a really strong focus on quality. And so again, about 5 years ago, we started picking up some work in the medical sector and found it was a really good match for our kind of quality driven approach, and found we were really good at being able to deliver what was needed, both technically, but also for compliance. And so as the med tech sector has exploded in the last 5 years, so have we. So we now have 70 people working in Cornwall, and we've kind of basically for the last few years just doubled and doubled and doubled again. So it's kind of fast learning curve, but it's been really exciting. And now getting into the AI space, it kind of feels like that same trajectory again. We're getting really heavily into embedded AI, which again isn't that crowded of a space at the moment. So we're just starting in there, but we feel like, again, that has the same amount of potential to possibly, potentially double the growth again. So we've got a really strong vision for kind of the future and where it can go, but it's all resting on kind of what we're good at and being able to find the right partners in the market who value that.
Fantastic, brilliant. It'd be really good because obviously you've got a great, interesting, growing, challenging position at the moment, and I'm sure we'll touch on more about that shortly, and go into, given that this is a leadership podcast, I'll, love to delve into your leadership experience and journey in a little bit more detail soon as well. But I think it'd be good to find out a bit more about how you got to where you are at Bluefruit, like how it all started for you, how your journey started. Did you start in tech, or how did that kind of happen, and then how did you get into Bluefruit?
Yeah. So I've listened to enough of your podcasts to hear about people's stories. So I was like, good. But yeah, I didn't actually start out in tech per se. So I think, again, you may or may not be able to tell I have a really weird accent, but I did not grow up in Cornwall. I grew up in Southern California. And it was really interesting. It was the time, especially growing up, I was really lucky. The state school that I went to just happened to have a lot of tech involved in it. Apple was doing a big project back then with donating computers to schools in California. And it made it just meant, although I didn't grow up coding, I grew up on a computer. So we played computer games, we did computer programming, we were doing writing on computers all the way through school. And it just meant, kind of opened up that world to me. And I kind of, again, grew up native on it, if you like. And then the same thing, I was quite young. I was still in primary school when the internet came out, and my parents got it very quickly. I remember us being like some of the first kids at school to like have the internet. And again, because both of my parents worked full time, I spent a lot of time at home by myself. Luckily, the internet was like a nicer place back then. I look at it now and I'm like, oh my God.
You worry for your children now, right?
Hours on the internet by myself, joy, but it opened up a new world to me. Here I was living in very suburban, kind of small-minded Southern California, and I got to talk to people all around the world. So I joined like GeoCities networks and that type of thing. My dad, again, also bought us a lot of PC games. So I got used to doing all this kind of stuff on the computer, even just networking around DOS and like learning how to use early computing systems before they had really nice, slick operating systems meant that, again, it was just kind of familiar. I can remember, like, again, joining networks and like trying poetry online, which is what you want to do when you're an angsty teenager. Support groups of being like, okay, maybe I don't have to share that with the people I go to school with if I'm too scared. I can go online and find those people that I can connect with and build those networks. And so I think that just helped me think about the fact that it took away any fear. The computers never had any barriers to me. So as I went then through school, I was really into art. And again, I was lucky in high school. So like college, American, I was about 16. And our school offered a graphic design course. It was brand new. And I got to start that. And that was really interesting because at the time in school, I was really social. I was kind of blonde, Southern California, super social, very outgoing, and kind of known as that. And suddenly decided, oh, hey, I'm going to show up and join this computer class. I was the only girl. And they were all kind of like, what are you doing here? You don't fit the mold for who's in our group. And they most of the people that were there were people that had a background, were interested in gaming or animation. The teacher was obsessed with Marvel. And I was just like, how am I going to fit in? But luckily, one, I just didn't care. I liked breaking people's expectations of me. And two, I just kind of went, well, okay, I'm not into comics, but I've watched all the Marvel like cartoons. And so I just found a way to kind of, again, relate back to the team, but also just kind of crack on with stuff. And it was really good because actually that course led me to be, to even know that graphic design was a thing. I think without it, I would have gone maybe to art school and done art, not realized I could be doing design online. So I ended up doing that as my degree. I went to University of California, Davis, which is about 2 hours outside of San Francisco. And pretty much everyone that does a graphic design there is like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a great designer in San Francisco. That's like the path. But we had very good practical teachers. It was like, most of you will not be able to do that. It was hyper competitive at the time. The Valley wasn't as big as it is now. So we were more thinking about ad agencies, not startups. Startups weren't really there. And if they were all the coders. There was no UX. There was not the amount of graphic design opportunities that there were now. But it meant that the courses we went on were really practical and our teachers were really practical. And again, I kind of recognized when I was at that course that I was not the best designer. Like, it was a good realization. Like, I looked around, I was like, okay, I'm fine. But there's other people that have more natural talent or come up with new ideas. I was really good at like scouring all the design books and doing a formula design. But what I discovered was that most of the people that were really good at design didn't like talking, weren't very good at presenting their ideas. I was the only one that also loved English and writing. So I became the project manager in most of our school projects and presenter and that type of thing, and kind of realized, okay, actually there's a different role for me. I don't have to be the designer. I can do other things within a project group, and kind of discovering that place. I also was at uni, needed to make money to pay for uni. So I started working at the school paper doing, school papers in the States are huge. They can actually make quite a bit of money. So I started again doing graphic design, and then I noticed the salespeople made more money. So I swapped over and started doing ad sales on the school newspaper. And that was probably my first sales job. And kind of realized, okay, actually quite good at this. Like, this is all right. And off the back of that, set up a magazine, like a school magazine with one of my friends, and got really into kind of publishing and that type of thing. So along this journey, I took a little detour and studied abroad in London for a year. I was really lucky. I went to a school, it's kind of very much set up for international students. So it was literally kind of the American international school, but it was right in the heart of London. And it was a really international classes, really small. And again, they didn't offer graphic design, but they offered marketing. So I took a lot of marketing courses, and I kind of got to learn all about things like trend prediction and behavior analysis and all of these really fascinating things. And again, that just kind of steered my direction more towards understanding people and marketing and the kind of driver backgrounds. So I went back to the States, finished graduating, had a few weird jobs in between with interesting brands. Like I worked for Red Bull for a little bit, and had a few stints kind of starting marketing job, but basically got back to London as soon as I could. Challenges, I came back to London on a 6-month student visa, and no one wants to hire you with a 6-month.
Oh, that's really tough, isn't it?
Yeah, so I came back and I got all these great interviews at like ad agencies and publishing, and then they all got to the point where it was like, okay, your eligibility to work, and none of them were willing to sponsor a grad. Basically, it's
one of the most frustrating parts of our job, actually. Visa eligibility. It is really tough. And actually,
yeah, and I just didn't have enough points. I didn't have enough work experience. I wasn't going to be on a high enough salary. But I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay in England. The one job I found that would consider it was IT recruitment into investment banking. Yeah, it was really interesting. It was probably the first time I got really deep into proper IT. So I was working with people who were actually software engineers, and learned all about languages, learned a lot about the banking sector in London as well. The job itself was interesting, where I worked, and the culture, horrendous, absolutely horrible, like literally every cliche of what could be bad. So it's a bit of a shame, because I really liked my job and I liked working with the tech teams, and I liked some of the companies I was working with. A lot of them were like in Europe and those places. That was really interesting. So it kind of sparked an interest in the sector for me that kept going. But I needed to get out of that particular company.
Yeah.
So I decided to do my master's. It's a good way to get a visa and stay in the country. But also, I was really interested in trying to get back towards publishing. It was something I still really enjoyed and was interested in. So I did that. Went really well. Again, the master's was great. It was at London College of Communication in Elephant and Castle. And again, really practical. So focused a lot on business. I probably learned as much about business as I learned about publishing. But I decided to focus my thesis on digital sales and revenue for print magazines. So at the time, this was kind of in the early 2000s, magazines hadn't done that well in terms of online revenue. In fact, they'd done really bad. And so I was really interested in that. And it was fascinating, because I was starting to look into stuff that now we know is kind of behavior-driven driven sales and data-driven sales, and all the stuff that Facebook now uses to control everything.
Yeah.
But at the time, people weren't doing that. It was just traditional ad revenues. And and they weren't looking at the analytics and like the tech behind it. So I thought that was really, really interesting. It led to a job at IPC Media. I actually started on Country Life magazine, which was as far away from innovative or technical as you could possibly get. They're really nice. But I quickly, the great thing is at the time in that company, it was really easy to go to different publications. So I got onto the women's weeklies, which again, at that time, were on a huge boom. We're on now, but it was on the upward trajectory. And it was when they were starting to just encourage cross-platform solutions. So it was really fun, because no one had really done anything in it. So I kind of got to decide what it looked like. So
oh wow.
Yeah, well, for me, there was people who were kind of trying to sell it, but there was no playbook for what it should look like. There was a few people that had ideas, but it was really fun. You kind of, I've got as a basically junior and kind of newish salesperson, it was a way for me to make a mark. It was a way for me to kind of show, look, I can think about something different. And it was interesting to hear, like, to see the brand's interaction and excitement over being able to do more digital stuff. So that got me some attention. It meant I got a mentor within the business. The mentor was extremely helpful and said, if you're really into digital, you need to leave print publishing, which was probably some of the best advice I've got in my career. So I left that and jumped to a digital marketing agency. So all the line at this whole point, I've been kind of junior all the way through. I joined that agency as well as a kind of junior under the founder, who's doing business development.
Wow.
And again, that it had only been going for a few years, but again, similar kind of, it was a startup-y vibe. Very much fail fast, let's experiment, let's grow. And so I was there for kind of about 4 years, and it was a bit of a whirlwind. We kind of went from 12 people to 60 people in 4 years. We went from revenues of kind of tens of hundreds of thousands to millions in 4 years.
Is it at this point that you started in leadership?
Yeah. So for me, I went from kind of a supporting role to suddenly I found myself in a few years, first kind of heading up London, then we opened a New York office, then we opened a Seattle office, and suddenly I was like, heading up 3 international offices and like a team and a multi-million-pound turnover, and I just kind of went, what just happened? I think the really interesting thing is there was no one else who'd done my role ahead of me. So some of the bigger organizations, you kind of go through a pipe work. You go, you go on a leadership journey, or you get coached, or you get trained for years. This one, it was just literally, okay, we're getting bigger, we should have a more senior person, you do it. So I didn't have anyone, like I got no leadership training. No one did. We were all figuring out what it meant to, like, neither did the founders. We got titles and responsibility while we were still figuring out what all that meant. So it was hard. It was kind of a bit of, wasn't quite fake it till you make it. It was kind of do the best we can when we don't really know what we're doing.
And time is of the essence, right? When you're in that situation, you'll scale up fast. So it was back on, do with the courses and things like that. The training often takes a backseat.
Yeah, and a lot of it was learning on the job, and we kind of, it was a lot of encouragement of that. It's a lot of reading other startup books, that type of thing. But most of them are on the same journey as you, so it's hard to kind of to learn. So somewhere along those lines, I got kind of a little bit burnt out on London, and at that point, my husband and I decided to move to Cornwall. So your husband was a chef in London, and he bought a restaurant in Cornwall. So you moved down to Cornwall.
Okay.
I actually pushed him to do it. I'm not looking back at my what was I thinking, but I came down to Cornwall on a holiday with him and loved how it seemed like California. You know, it had like the similar vibe, more friendly. As a person that didn't grow up or go to school in England, I found London was really hard to connect to people. And I liked the fact that when I went to Cornwall, like I connected with the person working at the store faster than I connected with like my neighbor in London for 10 years. So it was a nice culture fit for me. But again, suddenly it's like, okay, now I'm running 3 teams from a conservatory remote in Cornwall. How do you do that? So luckily I was really ready for COVID. I was like, I know how to do this.
Fantastic.
It was all, you know, when I look back on it now, it was just a manic curve in terms of growth and myself and what I was and the responsibility I was taking on. And it did hit a bit of a head when I went on maternity leave. And thought it would be fine. Thought I'd set it all up and thought it'd be fine. But while I was away, stuff didn't go quite as well as it was when I was there. And actually, right before I came back, I was made redundant. And so that was really, really hard. It was a big hit because I still had a lot of imposter syndrome about being a leader at all in the first place. And so then to be told that as a leader I was redundant, it makes sense. I was like, how can you have a sales team without a sales director? Like, I don't
particularly after your maternity leave, I can imagine that felt like a lot of unfinished business as well, because you
I was ready to go back. I was like super excited, ready to go back. And it was a big emotional setback too. I loved the people I worked with. I really liked the company. I really liked the culture. So it was not just a professional hit. It was like a personal hit. And it's interesting. I was reflecting on it again, just getting ready for this talk, because it's something that's it was about 8 years ago now, or 7 years ago now, and it's taken me a long time to kind of process it all. I was really lucky at the time. Again, yay for internet networks, that I found a network of women. I got support. I actually pushed back and got the compensation I was due, because you're not allowed to make people redundant when they're on maternity leave. And so I did push back on it. So I got some of the, what's it called? I got some of the validation, if you like, from kind of winning that battle. And I think I obsessed over that for a long time. But actually, in terms of the leadership journey I'm going on now and kind of reflecting back on what a good leader is, when I look back at the situation, yes, the company was absolutely responsible for making a bad decision in terms of maternity rights. But if I look at, it's not 100% the company's fault. When I look at it, I look at my leadership style and what I was doing, You know, I was very closed in. Everything was my stuff. It was on my team. It was in my head. It was my plan, my strategy, and I was very much delivering the business development activity. And what I wasn't being transparent in terms of helping people to see my vision, or to see where I was going, or to see my processes. I wasn't recording my processes anywhere. So it meant that when I left, it was like a delivery person left, not a leader.
Yeah. So you were more managing rather than leading, which is actually something that I'd like to, I guess, delve into a little bit more then. So let's talk about your leadership style and how that's evolved then. Obviously, it sounds like you did a lot of reflection after the redundancy. And that's, I'm sure, helped you as a leader and what you're doing at the moment at Bluefruit. So if you can talk to us more about that and how your team would describe you as a leader now, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, and I have to say, you know, one of the easiest ways that Bluefruit helped me bounce back from a lot of that insecurity is I was actually offered my director job at Bluefruit while I was pregnant. So it's kind of like,
amazing.
Hey, like not everybody cares about this type of thing. So, but again, you know, starting there, obviously had some concerns. Okay, how am I going to be different? And Bluefruit, when I started at Bluefruit, I was in a similar role originally, which was kind of head of, not a company director. And then about 6 months in, I was made a company director, and I didn't realize what that meant until it happened. Luckily, I read into it before I signed up. But, you know, again, not having been through the more traditional corporate leadership structure, I didn't realize, you know, the difference between being a kind of manager, like you said, and the responsibilities of being a leader in terms of what you have to, your kind of care for the whole of the business and being able to look at things big picture and strategically, not just the delivery of your own team, but what's the strategy for the business? Are we doing the right things? Are you questioning yourself enough? And I think that's been probably the biggest journey I've gone on through Bluefruit, is learning how to transition from being a delivery person and partner into a strategic leader, and you just being able to kind of take that step up and being able to have that higher level view of everything. And that's definitely been one of my biggest challenges, but also one of the biggest learning curves, and kind of opportunities for me, and especially my role at the moment.
I think when you reach that level of trust, then that's when your team really flourishes as well, isn't it? And it sounds like you've learned that a lot, which is really great. One thing I loved about the discussion me and you had a couple of weeks ago now was the piece around D&I. So how important is diversity and inclusion to you, and how have you tackled that and helped embrace it and turn things into really positive, particularly when you work within embedded and AI? It's tough enough world already, but when you try and create a really diverse and inclusive culture, you've got the challenges that, I mean, you're in Cornwall as well. It's remote location. So how's that journey been for you at Bluefruit?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting. Again, you know, kind of the whole way through my path, there's been a lot of instances where it's like, you know, you don't belong, you don't fit, you can't fit in. Like, even when I first moved to England, I dyed my hair black. So I was like, I'm not going to be the blonde girl from California. Like, no one will take me seriously. So I think there was, you know, there's a lot of, okay, how can we open up doors for people? Again, I saw a huge amount of issues when I was doing IT recruitment into investment banking in the early 2000s. It was not a diverse or good, it wasn't a good place, especially the company I was in. I was exposed to a huge amount of stuff that now would be completely unacceptable. And so, but, you know, in the IT, you know, I remember working with a woman trying to place her, and she was a female developer. And I remember meeting her and just thinking, God, she's just so unmotivated, and just so down, and just so like, well, if you find me anything. And I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why she was so downbeat. And now, kind of having worked, as you said, having worked more into the deep tech world and getting to see more the insights into it and getting more involved with women in tech communities, you do just hear these stories about how bad it's been for so long. And I kind of now have a whole new sympathy back for that person back then, because she'd been in it for 20 years previously. And so it's just, if I kind of see something like that, it's just something I don't believe should exist and I want to change. And I think what's great is Bluefruit as a company believes in that. It's actually, in terms of places I've worked, out of all the places I've ever worked, it's the most I've never felt like I was a woman in the best way. I'm just a person that works there. I happen to be a parent, but there's as many parents who talk about their children, and it doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl or whatever background you kind of come from, or it's all that matters is your outcome. It mattered more that I wasn't an engineer than I was a woman. And that was refreshing. So I just thought, okay, here we have a workplace that is trying really hard culturally to be open, wants to bring in as many people as possible. How do we improve, but isn't actually very diverse? How do we improve that? And we started looking into, so worked really well with we brought in an HR manager, which helps. And then started to look into it with her, and we worked really hard to make all of our content unbiased. So we did a big review of content. We looked at all of our job adverts. We kind of did that step first of trying to remove any kind of gender coded language within there. And then we went a step further, which was something we already had in place, which was to have developers do some exercises, so that what that helps with is not just gender, but also background bias. So in some ways with our team, again, because there's not that many embedded engineers out there, we don't really care what people's education is, or
so right, this is why you don't send a CV, you literally just do the tech test, right? And the results, you could be
we don't believe CVs. We want to know how do they code, what approach do they take, are they open to test driven development? It's not very common for embedded engineers to do test development, and so it's not about if they've done it, it's about will they do it, will they try, will they work well within our development culture. And what's been great about, because that already existed, all we had to do was remove CVs altogether, and also remove names from the exercises. So now we've got exercises where people have a number assigned to them, and what we found was it really increased the background of people that we got in, so people from different backgrounds.
So interesting, that, isn't it?
Ages, it's massively helped with our age recruitment. So actually we've had a number of people that have joined us that are kind of, in traditional tech sense, quite a lot older than the average kind of new starts. And so we saw a lot of diversity. The one area we haven't seen that much impact in was on the development side, gender. So in some of the other roles, software testing, quality analysts, that type of thing, gender's been fine. That's gone up along with everything else, but not for software engineers. So started looking into that a lot more, and it's basically a pipeline problem. So we haven't got enough software. There's not enough embedded engineers in the world, and there's definitely not enough women in embedded engineering. Like, I think that there's very, very small numbers globally. So how can we hire what's not there? And so that's where I started to look into how can we change that.
Fantastic. So interesting, really interesting. It'd be great to see more and more businesses doing that moving forward. So I think that'll be really interesting. You mentioned briefly before about kind of managing large teams and opening up in different locations and things, and I think that was one of your previous roles, but you talked a lot about how obviously you'd gained a lot of experience previously at remote management, and that's come in really handy this year given what we're dealing with in 2020. I think it'd be really interesting because I don't think we've had anyone on the podcast before that's had that many years experience of remote management. It'd be really interesting to see if there's anything that you've done differently that's worked well for you that others would be able to utilize and learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really lucky this time around that we have things like Zoom. One of the biggest challenges for remote management is communication. So the biggest thing I learned when I kind of went remote the first time was how bad email is at communication, for example. How easy it is to mix context and to lose, and the fact that we all apply our own context to things that might not need it. So there was a lot, when I was first doing it, there was a lot of stuff around where I talk to people all the time, but it would maybe be on the chat we were using at the time, or it would be on email, and so much stuff got lost in translation, and so many things got escalated in a negative way because of a miscommunication that wouldn't have happened if we were in person. It wouldn't have happened if we'd been able to read each other's body language, if we'd been able to see each other's faces, if you could tell being sarcastic, or if you could tell that the person was posing it as a, you know, sometimes, especially in tech, you kind of throw stuff out there just to see how people respond. But if you're doing that, sometimes people take it dead seriously and think and can go off on the wrong tangent. And I think I'm still seeing it sometimes, you know, now, where if the connection's down, or maybe we'll start something in a conversation on Slack and it starts to go in a weird direction where it's like, okay, we need to get on the screen. I need to see your face. Like, are you freaking out right now? Or, you know, have I just given you maybe a project that's overwhelming you? And you can't tell that unless you can literally see their face kind of crumble. So I think that's the big thing, is just being able to not just have that kind of still face-to-face communication, if you like, but making sure that we take the time to read it and check in. I think, and actually spending the time to check in with everyone. Again, when I was first doing the remote management, I had to schedule in time for all of my individual teams just to catch up with them, just to kind of say, like, how's it going? What are you doing? What's going on in your life right now? Because you're not there every day, so you don't hear the stuff that people say when they come into the office and they let you know that they're stressed out. And so sometimes you overload people when they can't take it. But other times you might see, if you're in the office, you'll notice that people come in full of energy and they're excited, and actually that could be a great time to give them a project. So how do you get that from people when you're not with them? And so a lot of that is, again, just trying to figure out ways to do it online, and you have to work harder to understand people. But if you're like, leadership is so much about those people and what they're able to do, that if you don't take that time to understand them, and especially, you know, I have a hard enough time understanding engineers sometimes, and them understanding me. So we've been doing a lot of work. We noticed, especially this time around, happened when I was doing it remotely before, but I've noticed this time around, it kind of started to digress. You know, some of my relationship with some of the other directors who are more technical than me, where it was kind of, it wasn't as good as it had been when we were in the office. So we've brought in a coach, you know, who's been working with us on communication a lot more, and just making sure we just check in with each other. And it's been fascinating, because like, one of the things he's having us do is kind of check that we've heard each other right. And we don't a lot of times. It's like,
it's crazy how often you don't, isn't it? That's the scary thing.
But it's also been wonderful, because, you know, there's been instances where I'll say, oh, well, you know, why are you really unhappy with this? And they'll be like, oh, but I'm not unhappy with what you've done. I just wanted it in a different format. It's like, oh, okay, I can fix that. That's easy to fix. You know, so I think that's the problem, is when you are remote and you can furrow a bit more, you can, like, small problems can escalate really quickly, and you don't have a chance to kind of feel each other out better. So you have to make the time to try to do that.
Love that.
Communication coach, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Fantastic, brilliant. So you've had a long career in obviously sales, marketing, and you've had like exposure to the tech side as well, and obviously number of years experience in leadership. What over that time, what would you say like your most challenging leadership experience has been, and what did you learn from that you think others might benefit from learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I started to talk about it a bit earlier. I think probably my misunderstanding of what makes a good leader. So I think that's probably the biggest journey I've been on this year. Again, with help from a coach, I really needed a coach to kind of help step me out of it. So for me, it's always been on my shoulders. Having never had people above me or supporting teams or people to learn from, I've always kind of created processes, created things. And that means that I've kind of assumed ownership of my team and of my processes and my approach and everything. And with that, it means that I've also taken on huge amounts of responsibility onto my own shoulders. So I hold myself accountable, and I kind of had these unrealistic expectations that a leader is supposed to have all the answers. Like if you're at the top and you're in charge of things and you're getting paid to be a leader, you should know everything, right? You should know what you're doing. And I think that was a big fear that I had in terms of a fear of failure. So going into board meetings and having them question stuff, it would make me naturally quite defensive and being like, I don't know the answer to this. I have to know the answer to this. And I was really hard on myself. And working with a coach, it's helped me realize, a little bit, taking a step back and looking sideways and realizing, one, the other directors in the business don't put that pressure on themselves. And they're not actually putting the pressure on me. It's my own expectations of myself. And so some of what, again, the coaches kind of helped me with is realizing that most leaders don't actually know all the answers. I've got a leadership team there on purpose to help me figure out what that is. I don't need to go to the board and say, I know the solution to everything. I can go to the board and go, here's my problem. How are we as a business going to help solve it? And so I think it's that kind of opening up and kind of accepting that I don't have to control it all. I don't have to own it all. I can ask for help. And that doesn't mean I'm not a leader. It just means I'm trying to figure out how to do the best job I can. And that's actually the best thing for the business. I think oftentimes where you can have problems with businesses is where you don't want to admit something's wrong. You want to solve the problem yourself. You want to fix it. Don't ask for help. And then that's where you can get stuck and just continuously make in this bad cycle of trying to, make a mistake and then trying to dig yourself out of it. Whereas actually it's much more important as a leader to know when to bring in help and to ask for help. And I think it took me a long time it took me a while this year to kind of come to that realization and realize, but since I have, it's literally like a weight's been lifted off. I'm much better at my job. And actually I'm getting better responses from the board.
I think, like you say, it's taking that pressure off yourself, isn't it? That you don't have to know everything, and it's all you put it on yourself. No one else put that on you, but really letting yourself have that break, and it makes such a difference. Like a weight's been lifted, like you say. So we're running out of time, but I've got a couple of quick questions that I want to make sure we get in with you, Caitlin, whilst we've got your time today. So you mentioned earlier when you moved to Cornwall and you're working remotely, you felt burnout, that digital burnout was starting to creep in. Obviously, this year, it's really important that everyone's looking after themselves properly, but I'd love to know if you've got any top tips for combating digital burnout for our listeners.
Yeah, I think, we had a challenge to, it was the COVID kind of timed in with one of our contracts naturally coming to an end. So we had a really stressful kind of start of the year. And I definitely started to pile it on with my team. And again, found myself doing, you ask how I get everything done, I work a lot. And I think although for a lot of people it's been great not to have a commute and to have all this stuff, there's also the danger when you're working from home, and I had it when I first started as well, that you work crazy hours. Like I had my HR manager asked me to start tallying up how many extra hours I was working. I was regularly kind of tracking up like a day or two extra a week of time. I add it all up in the hours because I just work. Because I've got 2 kids, so I would stop, I put them to bed, I do all of that, and then I just go back online and I would work until I went to sleep. And I thought that was good, but actually, I've kind of, again, with working with the coach and talking to the team, just have stopped doing that, and my work's much better. You know, so I think that is the thing. I think it can be really tempting right now, when we've all set up these great home offices now, to just keep working. Especially when it's dark and you can't. It's easier in the summer to go out and be outside and it calls you. When it's dark and it's easy just to stay and keep working. But actually, you know, the stress levels and the work was digressing. So I'm kind of actively now forcing myself to walk at lunchtime, to get away from your desk, to get up, to get kind of fresh air. I'm making myself not turn on the computer at the weekend at all. And you know, and
well, if you can stick to that, it's hard making that change, isn't it? Like it is really difficult. So that's fantastic.
So many times though, we hear as leaders, when you do that and you do these extra hours and you send emails late at night, though, it does give that sense of pressure, doesn't it, for your team as well? They subconsciously think, oh, she's working harder, I've got to work harder. And it's not, that's not what you mean to do. You're just doing it for yourself. But the whole reflection that it has on the team and the wider business is actually a lot of time can be a real negative. So it's great that you're trying to combat that. And obviously you live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world. So being able to get some fresh air and spend some quality time with your family. We had a nice sunny summer as well for you, so hopefully
well, and even the winter, like it's pretty nice. Pretty much I do take Fridays off to be
that's great.
A 3-year-old, so kind of, again, that was one of the things I was excited about Bluefruit, is they let you do flexi time. It doesn't matter what level you're at. So I've been, again, making a concerted effort instead of just like, it's really easy, especially we got used to it during when you were doing like home education stuff. It's like, oh, okay, it's fine, I'll just put CBeebies on, just get a few little emails done. And I've just been like, no, okay, from like 9 o'clock onwards, I just get out of the house and just go somewhere. We're lucky right now, we can, but you know, going to the beach or going to the park, and just to like, I've had to literally forcefully remove myself from my devices.
And also that you, like you say, you give Fridays off yourself, but you've got all the other initiatives that you're involved in. So I'll quickly go through them, because I'd love for you to just talk about TECgirls a little bit, about that initiative and what you're doing there, and just introduce our other leaders on that. But obviously you're chair of the board of Cornwall and Scilly Isles for Digital Skills Partnership. And obviously you've got the board for employment skills as well, and TECgirls. So tell us a little bit about TECgirls and what you're up to with that.
Yeah, and I should say the kind of other boards are really, you know, I'm on them because of TECgirls probably, and Bluefruit. So it sounds like a lot to be on all three, but it's all got
sounds like a lot.
It's got the underpinning thing of, it's the same goal. I've got the same goal on all of them, which is awesome. Within Cornwall, how do we help more young girls understand how they can get into digital jobs? So I get to be the same person in all of those. So I just kind of, it just means I've got a few different audiences to talk to it about. And it's been really useful as well to see how other boards run and to learn from other leaders. So I've probably got more from them than I give. But yeah, so TECgirls though, again, it came about, like I said, from realizing there's a pipeline problem with engineers. A lot of our clients as well, manufacturing, engineering, bioscience space, again, talk to women that work in there, and they're like the women, they work in those spaces. And we just kind of got together, and I was kind of just sick of everyone complaining about it. And so we dug into it in Cornwall specifically, and we looked through the pipeline all the way going back, trying to understand the problem. And we looked and kind of went, okay, there's no graduates. Okay, well, what about studying? No, actually, you know, in Cornwall, 2019, the GCSE and A levels were worse for girls than they are nationally. So there we go. That's the problem. Going back from that, I started I thought, okay, I'll volunteer at a Saturday tech club. That was the kind of a free tech club. My son's really into it, so I could bring him and I could volunteer, multitasking. And I was showing up to that, and there was no girls there. And this was a free club that anyone could go to. So I thought, maybe if I volunteer, maybe if I increase a bit of the marketing to it, help them with a bit of gender neutral marketing, it'll help. But there still weren't any girls. So we thought, okay, maybe if we set up a different kind of club, maybe something that isn't just tech tech, but more kind of creative and expand it out. What could we do? So that's where TECgirls came from. And the real goal is about helping very young girls, so girls as young as kind of reception year 1, start to get excited about what's possible. And it's less about building like skills and more about building excitement and wonder and inspiration. So that way, as they get older, they can join the existing paths of education or these other clubs. So we're trying to start at the base to build up a big pipeline of girls that can then feed into the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. That's awesome. And I love some of the initiatives working really closely with all the schools. It was really at that grassroots level, which was incredible. And it was great hearing more about that. So if anyone's got any questions and want to set up something similar, they're okay to get in touch with you and to talk about TECgirls, because it's awesome.
Yeah, we just ran a Zoom-based microbit session for 4 schools, and it worked really well. It's a really nice way to run remote training. So I'm really happy to share that with other people.
Yeah, I love that. I loved it. It's all about that partnership and creating that community. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. And apologies, we've run out of time, Caitlin, but thank you so much for spending your time with us and discussing your story. It's been incredible having you on the show. If anyone wants to reach out to you, are they all right to message you on LinkedIn? Is that the best form of contact? Twitter?
Yeah.
Obviously, active on Twitter.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter. I've got a few ways to reach me. So yeah, reach out definitely. Either via my personal one or via TECgirls as well.
Perfect. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. Bye.
We would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. It means a lot to us and we really appreciate your support.